Hi, this is Kurt Dronowski. Glad to see you folks again here to watch us. And I'm the chairman of the Greater Education Council of Connecticut. And this is part of our ongoing series of interviewing interesting and relevant people around the state of Connecticut. And today we have Alan Shaw. For background, Alan and I have known each other for, let's say 10, going on 14 years.
Yeah.
That's right. So we have been in the trenches. We are both Tea Partiers, and the Tea Party, by the way, is still around, despite what you think. We have Tea Party people serving in the state legislature, despite what you think, okay? And we have other Tea Party people who are hard at work on other key issues, despite what you think. So all of that said, I'm bringing Alan here because he offers a very unique perspective on the world. He lives in Stamford, and he has spent, you'd say, most of your working life as a 9/11 dispatcher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's that, but he knows Stamford like the back of his hand, and he understands the history of Stamford better than most as well. So there's that part, but we've also been involved in battles like fighting Common Core, and that's something we'll go over, and there are other educational issues and other political issues. So with that said, the place I'd really like to start, we always do, is we need your life story.
I don't know how much of a life story I've got, but other than being alive.
Okay, where were you born?
Born and raised in Stamford.
Right.
I'm the only one in my family from Connecticut.
Okay.
My parents were from Massachusetts. My two brothers were born in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
My family was living in Stamford when I was born.
Okay.
They picked it because it was a nice bedroom community close to the New York airports.
Mm-hmm.
My father traveled 2 to 3 weeks out of the month for work a lot of the times and needed to be near an airport.
Right.
And our part of Connecticut was basically New York Light, New York North.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up to, at a time, we didn't call them home offices, but my father's office was in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
And his vice president came in and worked in our house, and his secretary came in and worked in our house.
Wow. Okay.
And I remember my mother saying once that on our street of maybe 20 or so houses, probably 10 to 12 of them were people with what we would now call home offices.
Mm-hmm.
And they ran various companies out of their homes.
Right.
And had dedicated working spaces. And I remember my father having the work ethic that he went downstairs at 9 o'clock in the morning. He came up for lunch. He went back down. He didn't come upstairs until 5 o'clock.
All right.
He maintained working hours in that office.
There you go. And it worked.
Yeah.
And did your mother have a job, or is he the sole? He was the sole.
He was the sole breadwinner. And then when they got divorced, my mother went back to work and worked at the public library for a while, which probably shaped my love of reading and information.
Yes. Okay. Right. So they were divorced, and you were fairly young.
I was 9.
9. Yeah. So, so that's it. You came up then through the public school system.
Yep.
Yes.
I've actually said that's my principal qualification for speaking on education, is that from kindergarten through my senior year in high school, I went to public school.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It always kind of bothers me when I see people running for their local board of education who went to this private school or that private school or this expensive university or that expensive university and say, we know how to fix the public school system. I mean, I've never actually been to a public school, but I know how to fix it. I mean, I think I drove by one once. That's that big building where all those people that I consider beneath me go.
Yeah, right. Okay, and then you had a special interest in theater, right?
Yeah, well, I accidentally fell into stagecraft and theater arts because just like our modern day with various curriculum battles, we had a specialized high school. And it was when fame was big on TV and the city wanted a performing arts high school. And the lobbying was that, well, we need a computer high school, so we'll put them in the same building. And hey, we need to teach business and accounting to people, so that goes in there. So we had a computer sciences, business and accounting, performing arts, and visual arts high school.
That almost sounds ahead of its time.
And it was 3 different groups. You did all your academics together, and then you went off for your core subjects. And I had originally applied for the computer sciences thing. Computers were new in the 80s, and it was something I thought I was interested in. And I remember my mother went to some meeting with the school and came back and said, well, the school thinks you'd be better in the art program. And why don't you think about art? You like to draw pictures. And at the time, I didn't really understand what was going on. I have heard various rumors over the years that they needed to fill spots in their art program.
Okay.
And so they already had enough people in their computer program. I ended up in visual arts. The art teacher was the head of stagecraft, ran the lighting and the set design. And I spent 4 years learning how to do that, and then went back as alumni
Okay.
for probably another 4 or 5 years and worked in the school auditorium where they rented it out to shows.
Okay. You didn't pick up any computer science along the way?
Nope, never set foot in the computer lab.
Well, yeah.
Interestingly enough, there was a TV production studio beneath the stage that I never
Wow.
did, but they had a video production school that they ran there, and that school has now been completely gutted, and it's a middle school now.
Okay. Yeah.
The program lasted, I think, 2 years after I graduated.
Right. So after you graduated, I think one of your first official acts was to become a Republican.
Oh, I did that actually while I was in school. My 18th birthday,
Yes.
I skipped school to do 2 things: register to vote and register for the draft.
Wow. Okay. Although you never called.
No, the draft was not active during the time I would have been eligible. I mean, it's still not active now, but you still
Right.
have to register. But
Yes,
from 18 to 36, I had that draft card in my wallet in case they called.
Right.
Now, I would have been exempt from that because the National Guard turned me down.
Oh, really? What was that all about?
Never had a really firm answer. It was one of 2 things, but they sent me for a couple of extra consults and then decided they didn't want me.
Okay. Their loss.
But, you know, in a way, I look back on it though, because I graduated high school in '88, so it would have been '87, '88 when all the recruiters were coming around, and it was interesting to see the way the different recruiters pushed their branches of the service. Some would talk about the educational opportunities. Join my service and you can go to, and we'll train you in a skill. Another one was join our service and you'll go to college. Some were, but one was like, we'll join our service because we have the best base life. We have movie theaters and supermarkets. And it was interesting, the different things, but it was a peacetime military. The interesting thing was at the time in '88, it would have been a 4-year commitment. Had I gone in, I would have been there in '91 when Desert Shield became Desert Storm.
Sure. Well,
And-
talk about a short war.
It was a short war, but you know what? All the people I went to school with who thought they were going in for a peacetime thing, they were going to go hang out and watch movies on an
Really?
air base somewhere.
These guys never anticipated they could go to war?
That was never pushed by most of the recruiters.
Well, of course they never push it.
I mean,
but
obviously,
you gotta be
you
realistic.
join the military, there's always a chance you could go to war. But remember, it was 20 years since the official end of Vietnam.
Yeah.
You know, I am one of the people that believes that war isn't over until we repatriate all of our dead. But
I see. So, became a Republican. So when would you say you started getting involved in politics?
got involved in politics, again, almost accidentally. We were running a candidate for mayor in Stamford on the Republican Party, and there were several newspaper articles. Well, actually, going back before that, for whatever reason, the Republican Party in Stamford went through a period of not being able to find people for the top executive spot.
Right.
1 year, they let the Democrat run unopposed. They didn't cross endorse, but they just didn't bother putting anyone up.
What year was this?
It was in the 80s or 90s. Or it would have been in the 90s. Would have been in the
Okay.
90s. Then the story I've heard is that the state central committee told them you have to run somebody and found somebody who was known to state central.
Yeah.
He ran but didn't run. He did no campaigning, put no signs up until the night before election day.
Yeah. And for this,
He was there just so they had a name on the ballot. He obviously lost.
okay.
Since then, I actually met him, and he seems like a nice guy and really a solid conservative guy, but
Yeah.
he just wasn't known in local politics. So then they ran this guy, well, my mother used to call him Looney Lenny,
Okay.
but that's because she knew his ex-wife. But he was a guy who was a transit advocate to the point where he made a show of relinquishing his driver's license because if everybody did that, that was somehow going to force the state to have a better bus network. And I remember
Looney Lenny.
reading some of the articles at the time, the DMV was like, you don't have to give up your license, just don't use it. Nope, I want to come into the office and give it to you back. I'm giving back this license. I'm making the stand that I don't need this license. All right, if you want to, we'll take it.
Okay. Well, that's. I mean, I just heard. to the audience, I must also tell you, I know that Alan has a special interest in all things transportation. We could certainly talk a lot about the rail system in Connecticut. But yeah,
They ran Lenny twice as the candidate. Didn't really do much as a candidate. The next year they run nobody. Then they run this guy, Charles Klein. He was the guy State Central told him to run.
this wasn't a guy who was caught up in the.
No. That's the next guy. That's how I got involved.
That's the next guy. Okay, all right.
So then they run this guy, and I know his name was Bill. I can't remember his last name. And they nominate him, and the chairman of the Stamford Republican Party at the time is interviewed in the newspaper. And one of the things he says is, "We asked a lot of other people, and they didn't want the job, so we found this guy." That does not energize me about a candidate. How about saying we looked long and hard and found the best candidate we could? I don't care if he really is the best candidate. Your job is to sell this guy as a candidate. You're running a campaign, and now you're telling me as a Republican voter, well, none of the other Republicans wanted it, so we got this guy. He was selling papers on the corner.
Actually, there's an explanation for this.
They want to lose?
No.
Okay.
1990.
What was 1990?
Lowell Weicker.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Okay, so when the sales income tax, when the income tax, not the sales tax, what am I saying? When the income tax was passed,
The temporary income tax, because
so-called temporary.
we're going to get rid of that any day now.
Did you ever look at the data on how dramatically the Republican membership dropped in Connecticut?
No, but I know it was a lot.
It was like that, and then from then on, it just trickled downward to the point where we're now at 20. Is it 20.4 or 21.4% of all registered voters are Republicans? That's pretty bad.
Right. Well, if you want to read some interesting commentary on Lowell Weicker, look for the book Without Reservation. It's actually an expose of the Mashantucket Pequots and how they fraudulently built their casino empire.
All right.
But it brings up the fact that Lowell Weicker is the reason they're a recognized tribe.
I see. So he was really the enabler throughout this whole
Yes.
saga. But yeah, so the fact that so many people left, I hate to say it, but the smart ones left first. So all of a sudden now the Republicans are having trouble finding good candidates. What a surprise.
Well, so they bring this guy in, they nominate him for mayor. And I think it was the newspaper, but looking back on it, it was probably the Democratic City Committee giving the newspaper the story. Discovers the guy's got a couple of felony convictions.
What's the name of this gentleman
I
again?
cannot remember his last name.
This is the one who ran for Senate.
No, this guy was running for mayor.
Oh, this is for mayor. So we still haven't gotten the other guy who ran for the Senate. Ooh.
No.
Wow.
So this guy's running for mayor of Stamford. He's the Republican candidate. And again, the party chairman is being asked these questions and says things like, "Oh, we didn't know he had felony convictions. We did a background check, but we misspelled his name." So you're just basically admitting to incompetence.
Right.
Again, even if he did misspell the name, never admit to it. Then they have the debate publicly in the media about we've asked him to step down as the candidate. He says, "No, you nominated me. I'm going to run. I want to be mayor of Stamford." And they went back and forth with this and finally got him to step down and nominated somebody else who came in late July for a November election.
Okay, yeah.
Didn't have a lot of time to campaign, still got 48% of the vote.
Not bad. All right.
But the interesting thing was, it comes out what this guy's convictions were. Was he was in a couple of bar fights. He was a Vietnam veteran, did multiple combat tours, came back, had an alcohol problem, got into some bar fights, quit drinking cold turkey because his son needed a kidney, and he went into a massive detox because he was the only nearby donor, so he could give his son a kidney.
Right.
I'm sorry, they make Hallmark movies of the week about that guy.
Yes, and that's the Republicans because
I would love to be the one doing the damage control on that story.
Yeah, wow. This is just reinforces the old joke that the Republicans are the party of the stupid.
You don't want to say it, but at the same time, it's like you had all the chances in the world to sell this guy as a candidate, and we said, "Oh no, we can't sell him. He's too positive."
Did they really say that? That's
No.
your read.
That's my read on it. So they put the other guy in. He almost wins. And then after that, we went through 14 years of Dan Malloy as mayor.
Yep.
Well, actually, this guy ran against Malloy. So then, when he got out, we did win briefly with Mike Pavey as mayor. He only served one term.
So was Malloy still mayor in 2009?
I don't remember the dates.
Yeah.
It might have been.
But yeah. Okay, well, somewhere along there, the Tea Party shows up.
Right. Well, so I got involved only because reading all these newspaper stories, I write a letter or an email at the time to the state party. And I said, how is it that we're in a country with a Republican president, George W. Bush, a Republican governor, Jody Rill, and we are having trouble finding a Republican mayor, even a candidate for Republican mayor? And I said at the time I'd looked up online and found the bylaws of State Central, which said they had oversight of the local political committees. And I found the bylaws of the Stamford Republican Town Committee that said they set I forget the exact wording, but they said it was something along, they set the policy and agenda for Republicans in Stamford. So my answer was, okay, you have oversight. They're clearly not sending a good agenda. I said, how do we get rid of them and how does somebody get rid of this group and form my own Republican Party?
Okay.
I get no reply back.
Yeah.
About a week later, another newspaper article about showing how pointless this campaign is. I sent another email to a guy named Bill Hamzy, who was the chairman of the state party.
Okay.
And
Hamzy. All right.
again, I say, look, now we have now we're looking for a replacement candidate. I said, this is clearly that we can't get, and again, I get no reply back from them. So I take the two emails and I forward those off to the RNC. I believe Michael Steele was the chair at the time.
Oh, geez.
And I say, I said, I don't remember if it was him or not, or it was his predecessor, but I contacted the National Republican Party and say, my state party will not reply to me. This is a situation with the local party. I'm looking for any help you can give me. Well, somebody at the RNC must have clearly got a hold of Connecticut.
Yes.
I get an email back from Bill Hamzy now saying, basically, do not ever contact me again.
Yeah.
We will not discuss this matter any further. I have given your information to the local chair and suggest that if you want to have better candidates, you should run for office.
Well, that's not a bad suggestion.
It's not a bad suggestion, but of course at this point we're already well into the campaign season, so running for office in this season is going to be an interesting thing. So then I go to work and a coworker comes to me and says, hey, I need to talk to you when you're on a break. I want to make sure for ethics rules that neither one of us is on the city payroll at the time we have this conversation.
Okay.
Comes to me and says, yeah, I think he was the secretary of the RTC at the time.
Okay.
And have you ever considered running for office? We need somebody in your district. And I said, oh, so you're the one that they got a hold of. He goes, what do you mean? I don't know anything about this.
Okay.
To this day, he swears he was not told by the RNC to get rid of me.
Okay.
They nominate me with no running mate for a board of representatives, which is our town council seat.
Yeah.
There's two openings. They have no candidate for the second opening. I am given no funding.
Of course. That's always been the case.
And I'm running against two popular Democrats who, interestingly enough, hate each other and won't put their names on each other's signs.
Was Zelensky one of them?
Zelensky and Diamond.
Yeah, Zelensky. Zelensky's still around.
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah.
They both had huge voting blocks, but oddly enough, they didn't like each other, but most of the people, again, would grin and bear it and vote for both Democrats. The interesting thing was I get told there's a meeting I have to go to where we're going to teach you how to run a campaign. Guy who was on the board of representatives gives this great thing, goes through the initial paperwork to file. Probably the only person that was actually friendly to new candidates. And there were several of us in this room at the public library doing this. He says, this is the form and this is the deadline, it has to be filed. Go down to the town clerk and file this form. I go down to the town clerk, I file it, and I get a phone call within an hour. You filed your paperwork to run already? Yeah, well, you told me we didn't have a meeting to nominate you yet. You're not the candidate. Well, apparently the state says I am because I just filed with the town clerk that I'm the Republican candidate. So, go have whatever vote you want.
Right. Yeah, how is it that we're going to say it, we're more Republican than the Republicans?
Well,
Yet we run afoul of them
because I don't.
over and over and over again.
It's not a matter of being more Republican or less Republican. The Republicans in general, because we stand for individual liberty and individual rights, we don't want labels. We don't want to be in a group. We don't want to be the two of us in a party. We're the two individuals who happen to be sitting next to each other. That's a Republican thing. That's a conservative standpoint, that we are individuals. And the problem is we're going up against, in general, a party that places a high cost on unity and cooperation. Go to a rally when there's the Prescott Bush dinner, which there's the big dinner that the state
Sure.
party has, and they have it in Stamford every year. The keynote speaker one year was Governor Walker. Scott Walker was coming in from where was he, Wisconsin?
Yes, that's
Yes.
right. That's right.
He was the keynote speaker, and we had a small group with the CCDL and some Tea Partiers and stuff out there to counter protest. By small group, I mean we had maybe 8 people.
Okay, yeah, that's small.
Palin Smith was there, John Hardy was there,
All right.
and all of a sudden we hear drums as the Democrat marching band comes in.
What?
Yes, trumpets and drums from the SEIU. The union sent people in to bang on drums. They were not drummers, don't get me wrong. There was no actual
They
music.
break up the get together.
They were there to protest Scott Walker.
Okay.
The
yes.
bus dropped off 30
Yeah.
people with drums and trumpets, and they walked up, and then another bus comes in with people with signs. And I mean, really, I didn't think Scott Walker was all that important to get this level of opposition.
Yeah, well, but now we understand, right?
Right. Now, the interesting thing is, you would think we would be unified in our opposition to this group. They've got a very unified group. They've got a union, a welfare reform group, all these like five or six
Oh,
different
yeah,
groups
no,
that
they-
have nothing to do with each other except they vaguely support.
Yeah,
Democrats.
This is one of the things. People fail to appreciate the degree and the depth, the complexity, the interlaced whatever to which these unions are politically organized.
But it wasn't just unions. That's the interesting thing. Yes, there were big unions there.
Yeah.
But there were other groups.
Yeah, but they're all linked together. So if the welfare committee is going to reach out to all the people
Right.
concerned in welfare.
So here we are, and I remember actually having the debate with a very well-known Republican, very well-known Tea Partier in our state, because I had a sign up there that the state had just laid off a bunch of state troopers. And I'm going to say it was in the 70s, 60s or 70s, the number of people they laid off. And so I had a sign up with however many state troopers they'd laid off. And I get into almost a screaming match with one of the Republicans who was there, because most of them got their jobs back, so that didn't count as a layoff. I'm sorry, the governor signed a budget that forced people to lose jobs. And they got their jobs back largely because of an oddball thing between the labor contract and a federal grant, and that was going to cost them way more to lay them off than to keep them employed. But
Oh, God.
this is the thing. You have this big show of unity with drums and trumpets and disparate groups. And you have a small handful of Republicans there, and we're arguing over what the sign says.
So maybe another way to think about this is that the history, right? The history of the labor movement starts with workers as a group, okay? Fighting for, wages, better conditions.
I'm a
group.
member of a union, and I've benefited from being a union member, but I will tell you that unions are perpetual motion machines,
Understood.
because a union derives their power from being able to go to the politicians and say, I represent this many thousand of members, and the politicians say, wow, these are all voters. I've got to listen to what these people say. May not have to do what they say, but I've got to listen to them. They get a seat at the table.
Yes, but the point
And
is that this is
then they
created-
go, but then the politician goes, well, there's this other group over here, and they also represent the same number of people. So the union goes, well, then I got to get more people. So they go and organize some other thing. They
right. And
they
they're
go and
good
get
at it.
another group of people to join the union because they need perpetual motion. They derive power from their members, but they need members to generate the power.
That's right.
And it's this circle that goes through, and that's the labor movement.
So let's talk about Connecticut a little bit. If you're to look at the overall total percentage of workers in America who are unionized. Would you take a guess at the number?
Nationwide,
Yes.
because we're including right to work states and
Yep.
states that don't
That's
have.
right. Yep.
eh,
The whole
I would
enchilada.
say it's maybe 30 to 40%, if that.
7.
7. Oh wow, okay,
7%.
way lower than I thought.
Okay. However, now we come to Connecticut,
Got to be about 60%.
at least. Okay. I think, what is it, 80% of the government employees are unionized. Most of the teachers are unionized, though not all.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that 40% number or something around there, probably higher, characterizes the state of affairs in Connecticut. So you have this, I'm not quite sure to explain this. You have these unions all right, you have the government unions, you have the trade unions, healthcare unions, teacher unions.
See, those are false categories, though.
Oh,
Okay. Years ago, my brother worked for an ambulance company, and they were looking to unionize. One of the unions that came to them and made a proposal for a very small mom and pop ambulance company,
right.
less than 100 employees. What union would you say would represent ambulance workers, EMTs?
SEIU.
Now, the Screen Actors Guild.
What? This is okay. How?
Union, because unions have diversified. See, the bricklayers union represented bricklayers, but then they realized there weren't enough bricklayers and they need more members to go tell Congress that they have many more thousand members. So the bricklayers said, we could also take on the camera operators. And then they said, well, since we got bricklayers and camera operators, we could go take the greengrocers in.
I mean, this is kind of like businesses acquiring each other.
Yes.
So that's, I'm still trying to get my head around this. So, I mean, if you have them acquiring the camera operators union, who's in
Oh
charge?
no, they don't acquire. They go into a place where there is no union. They don't acquire another union. They come into a place and say, hey, we'll go into a grocery store, and they'll say, you know, your employees need to be in a union. We can provide union
Yeah,
services
but
for them.
so what happens to the union dues?
They go in and on a very basic level, any union can represent anybody. It's more comedic that the Screen Actors Guild was looking into that. At one point, there was a dispatch center in Connecticut where the police dispatcher was represented by the carpenters union. Yeah, they weren't carpenters, but again, on a very basic level, unions look at three things: work rules, health benefits, and salary, wages. Anybody can negotiate those three items for anybody else. You know, the bigger unions have more resources to bring to play. So that's why you see these things. I mean, that's why you get to a place where a union that you know, like the example I used, the bricklayers are representing the greengrocers. Why? Well, because they can get the greengrocers a raise, they can get the greengrocers a better benefits package, they can get the greengrocers non-slip shoes to wear.
Okay, but to go back to your first example, before being approached by SAG, the ambulance drivers union.
Well, there was no union. There was a bunch of employees in a small company that did not have a union before. They were looking for a union. They reached out to a bunch of different unions.
So they wanted to unionize.
They wanted to unionize.
Okay. Well,
And so a union that you would think would have absolutely nothing to do with this
yes, helps out.
comes in and says, yeah, we'll make a proposal for that.
All right. All right, so that goes back to your other point then. You know, given that there are only three things that you're seeking to do, anybody can do them. So then it doesn't, there are no guidelines with respect to the kind of business the people are in who choose to unionize.
Because we have free association.
Right, sure.
And this is one of the places where Republicans, even though there's a startling number of conservatives in the labor movement, Republicans tend to want to fight against the union, but at the same time, I can't be a constitutionalist and say you have the right of free association to any group you want to be in, except for that group over there. You can't be in that group. So we don't know where we want to go with these.
Yeah. Anyway, so I mean,
But I do think that unions also form organically, much the way political parties form organically. A bunch of people get together and say, you know what, the floor's slippery at work and the boss says we can't, the boss won't buy us non-slip shoes. Let's form an association and demand no-slip shoes or we won't come to work.
Okay,
That's a union.
All right. That said, my two most common complaints about unions are that if you compare two companies, one with unions and one without, the one without is less productive. The company makes less money. They're less profitable.
Yeah, the one without unions?
The one with unions.
Well, yeah.
And the worst part of all, they are less innovative. Fewer patents, fewer everything.
A lot of that depends on the state and depends on the laws the unions and the companies are operating
Yeah,
under.
but when you add it all up, there's a clear distinction. So, I mean, I don't know of an innovative union. Do you know of an innovative union?
No, but it's not it's not an innovative union, because there are innovative unions, but they're innovative within labor management.
Yeah, well,
They're not innovative in building widgets because that's the company's job to be
but
innovative.
they're a part of the company. They're the guys who are right there working at the machines.
You're right.
I mean, I'll tell you that in most manufacturing enterprises, when it comes to innovation, innovation originates, quote, at the bench. All right? It's not some guy sitting in a room somewhere, I mean,
Oh,
in
no.
most cases, and saying, oh, we could change the shape of this gear a little bit. No, it's the guy standing there
There's
who notices something. You know, my father, when he was an engineer, they had these R&D requisition forms. If somebody got an idea, they'd send it to the R&D lab, and they'd look at it and figure out what they could do.
Yeah, there's a show on TV called The Food That Built America,
Okay.
and they go in and they talk about the burger war between McDonald's and Burger King, or I was watching one on the development of Subway, which developed here in Connecticut. But one of them was about chips, and potato chips and corn chips and things like that. Doritos was invented by a janitor. The company had an open policy that an open door policy for management. If you have an idea, bring it to management. And the guy came in one day, said, you know what we need? We need a nacho cheese flavored chip.
American needs, right, okay.
And he says, this is something people want.
All right.
They want spicy, they want the cheese, they want this, they don't want a plain potato chip.
Yeah, okay.
And it was a guy who had
Yeah.
no background in food, no background in anything.
It wasn't a memo from the unions saying, guys, we got to innovate. That didn't happen. Anyway, to the audience, I want to bring your attention, if you haven't already noticed, to the T-shirt that Alan is wearing. Make Christmas Great Again. So that's a little something to trigger liberals. That's all. That's all.
Oh, when you talk about making Christmas great again, we have to talk about a couple of things. Obviously, it's a riff on Donald Trump's Make America Great Again.
Right.
But it also addresses the war on Christmas and the greater
Yes.
war on Christianity.
Yep.
There was I believe it was in one of the African countries, there was a massacre on Christmas Day. Did not make much of the U.S. news.
Nigeria.
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
We can't talk about that because it was Muslims who did the killing, and they're the current favored nation in the media.
That would apparently that would appear to be true. But before we go into that, I would like for us to revisit the subject we talked about yesterday.
Okay.
That would be, how do we design an electoral college for the state of Connecticut?
Well, designing the Electoral College is easy. And Connecticut, I don't know why we don't have one, because we invented the Electoral College on a federal level. It is
However,
it is the result of the Connecticut Compromise.
Okay, yes. Talk about the Connecticut Compromise.
At one point it was proposed under the Constitution that it would be Congress who elected the president, that we would not have a direct elected president. And the fear at the time was that the president would then only be beholden to the representatives and senators. Now also remember that at the time, the senators were not directly elected by the people either. They were elected by state legislatures, because the Senate is supposed to represent the needs of the state. The House of Representatives is supposed to represent the needs of the people. Both together would come together and elect a president under this plan. And a lot of people didn't want this. And there were a lot of compromises made. So it's funny when we talk about our bipartisan or lack of bipartisan stuff. In our founding days, there were a lot of compromises made that we now think of as just the way we do things. But the idea was to have a separate body, equal in size and number to the Congress, that would be the ones who picked the president. Now, the Electoral College never actually meets as a group. The electors in a given state meet and then forward their information. They forward their vote. If you ever look at the presidential ballot in Connecticut, it doesn't actually say cast a vote for Donald Trump and Mike Pence. It says vote for a slate of electors pledged to Donald Trump and Mike Pence. You're actually voting for those electors. Since then, there have been several states that have tried to circumvent the Electoral College, or
They continue to try.
I believe it's Maine that their electors are at large. They're not district based.
And Maryland.
Some of them are district based, so that if you are the elector for the 5th Connecticut district, you go with where the popular vote in the 5th district was, but it doesn't matter if the other 4 went the other way. Maine, it's by the, some of them are the representatives are district based, but the 2 senators go by the state popular vote. And there's a couple of different methods there. But I once put together the idea, I believe it was the first time Tom Foley ran for governor.
Okay, so we're talking 2008?
Probably.
I think
No.
2010 was the second time he ran, wasn't it?
So probably would have been 2008, yeah.
Or 2006. Okay.
So it would have been, the idea was, it was Malloy Foley, and you looked and said, and somebody showed a map of how the
2014.
different towns voted.
Yeah.
And when you look at a map of how the towns voted in Connecticut, and with the popular vote statewide, Dan Malloy won, and he won with a fairly solid lead. But the majority of towns were colored red on the map for Republicans. More towns voted for Tom Foley. All the areas that were blue on the Connecticut map, aside from the very far northwest corner, about 4 or 5 towns up there,
Right.
where New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts all come together, the only places that were blue were the big cities. Stamford, Norwalk, New Haven, Waterbury, Hartford.
Right.
But they were enough to tell the other towns it doesn't matter who you vote for.
Right. Same
If
pattern.
if you live in Pomfret, don't bother voting because your votes don't count. And this is what an electoral college was designed to prevent. If we didn't have an electoral college, Delaware, the place that Joe Biden is from, might as well petition the king to become a colony again, because they will have no vote, because New York and Texas and California will simply tell Delaware who the president will be.
That's right. That's
So-
something that's not appreciated.
No. And Delaware, again, Delaware was the first state. They are very proud of the fact they have one of their license plates. They were the first ones to ratify the Constitution. And frankly, without an electoral college, they might as well have not even shown up to the convention.
Yeah.
So the idea that all the small towns in Connecticut and even some mid-sized towns and places like Windsor and, you know, places, you know, Wilton, Weston, don't matter because Waterbury voted. Darien, New Canaan don't matter because Stamford and Norwalk voted. And that's what an electoral college was designed to stop. Now, I will say that my proposal had an oddball thing because my electoral college for Connecticut that I proposed in this article would have been a little over twice the size of the state legislature.
Oh, okay, yes.
And that is because of the way it would definitely need to be worked out how you allocate the electors, where the electors are from. So if you take Stamford as an example, Stamford has all or part of 2 Senate districts and 6 House districts on a state level.
Right.
So by my plan, I said, okay, 2 and 6 is 8. There will be 8 electors from Stamford. Now, Greenwich has 1 Senate district, but I believe 2 or 3 House districts.
I think there's more, actually.
Maybe more, but you know, they would have had 4 under that. Now, Darien, which had 1 House district and 1
Senator.
Senate district, would have get 2 electors. So the thing is, 27th district covers Darien, covers Stamford. So should they have 2? Should there be 2 electors, or should we pick 1 from 27?
Well,
My plan was you pick 2 because the disparity I was looking at on this map was how towns voted. Now the interesting thing was you look at a town that went Republican for the governorship, but in the state legislature, the supermajority Democrats. So that shows you that that voters are thinking. They said, well, we want the Republican for governor, but we're still electing a Democrat for a representative and a Democrat for a senator. So it's not an exact science. So my way of thinking was because we want to, my plan really was that the towns should be key in this. So each town should send a number of electors.
Right. So I mean, the way you're setting it up, if I'm understanding it correctly, is ultimately each town has a state senator as a vote.
At least one.
Right. So we have 169 towns.
Mm-hmm.
So right off the bat, instead of 36, you're talking about 169, quote, senators as an elector.
Well, again, and these electors would not be allowed to be the state representatives or the state sector or
Right.
state senators because we don't want the legislature picking our governor.
All right. So then the question is, how does that get? You have the 36 senatorial districts, but now there's this proposed map of 169 electors. So how do you break out the electors according to the 36 seats in the Senate?
A combination of the Senate district, the House districts, and the town lines. So again,
Right.
Stamford would have 8 electors under this plan. Oddly enough, I did find a couple of strange places. You'd think Hartford would have a lot of electors
I think Hartford would have.
because it's a big city, it's populous, so you'd think there'd be a whole lot of House seats there.
Okay, yes.
But it turned out they didn't. I think that Hartford only ended up with 6.
Okay, well,
But-
that's okay because their population is a little bit less than Stanford.
But the interesting thing was almost every district in Hartford went into some neighboring town. So I think it was Windsor,
Okay, yeah,
which I don't think of Windsor. I don't know much about Windsor, but I don't think of it being a big city.
it's not.
But Windsor had this. I think Windsor had either 6 or 8 spots
What?
because there were so many partial districts, which is one of the problems with my plan. Because if every town gets one for every district that touches it,
Yes,
and you have a town that's where all the other surrounding places have their carve up their leftovers,
yeah.
you
so-
could have a small town with more delegates or more electors
Okay.
than a big city.
All right, so the point to keep in mind now is, and it's another aspect of this to bring to the audience. Oops, sorry.
Now, I will say this, that when I ran the numbers, if I ran the numbers and then, again, because this was purely hypothetical, what I did was I simply took, if the town went Republican, if the town was colored in red on the state's map, I said all 8, or all the electors went red. If it was colored blue on the map, I said all the electors. So you could really say, you could go by state, you could just as easily say we're going to go by who won the representative district or who won the senator district. So you might have had a more homogeneous,
Yeah,
more
so-
even split, but going by town, it would have been, I'm going to say it was Foley 300 and something to Malloy 100 and something.
Okay,
It-
that would be a pure. That's a
Pure going by town,
Yeah. Okay.
it ended up with almost a 3-to-1 or 2-to-1.
Right.
So
I can hear the Democrats screaming now.
you know, most of the Democrats just didn't even take it seriously. Why would we need an electoral college? But these are the same people that want to tell you the 3/5 compromise was racist when it was really about not letting the South buy Congress.
Yes, for example. But yes,
You know,
but I mean, this gets to the heart of what has been the debate all along here, right? Is Democrats don't want to say we're arguing for a form of, quote, pure democracy. And as Ben Franklin had said, you know, we've given you a republic, and it's the recognition that if you're going to have a stable government, you have to have the features of a republic.
and there's always the old joke that democracy is 4 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for dinner.
Right. And the republic?
Well, the republic is the four wolves have a representative and the lamb has a representative, and the two of them are going to decide on dinner.
Oh, no, the lamb has a gun.
Well, yes,
Right. Then they get to decide who's going to be for dinner. Yeah, so no, this is I mean, we have dealt with this, but not enough people have to understand these differences. You know, it's also important, you made the point earlier, the Constitution is a compromise document. Okay? It wasn't just fabricated out of whole cloth. It was a process.
it was an honest debate, and unfortunately, I don't think in our partisan time that a new constitutional convention would be that honest debate. I think it would be
Right, well-
people looking to bring what agenda comes in.
Right. Well, you and I agree on that. Other people are much more comfortable with the Convention of States idea.
A convention of states is not necessarily a bad idea. Obviously, our founders put it in as one of the two options.
Right.
The problem is it's never been done before. Well, I'm sorry, we did have one, but it was not done under the Constitution. It was to amend the Articles of Confederation. And the
Okay.
first thing they did was scrap the Articles of Confederation and say we're going to do a whole new document.
Right. So we'd be confronted with the same thing.
So if you think about the way political conventions or any parliamentary meeting, go to a meeting of the Ladies Knitting Society that follows Robert's rules. There's rules on how an agenda is made. There's rules on how people vote. There's rules on how people make motions. But we've never done that. It's not clear whether they'd have to use Robert's rules or whether they'd use Jefferson's rules for the Senate or whether they'd come up with something else. There's never been one. And unfortunately, I've heard people who are proponents of the Convention of States say, well, of course there's rules. We did a mock one made up entirely out of our supporters, and it was very collegial, and everybody got along.
There you go.
I will guarantee you that both Democrats and Republicans would agree that if only their party voted, it would be very collegial. And of course, the opposition won't like that idea about not voting, but you know.
Right. Which segue into another subject, which touches on yet the other subject we need to get to, and that is Marxism. We know that there's a very strong Marxist element that has infiltrated our society, and these guys are the biggest political opportunists there ever were. So when presented with something like a convention, a constitutional convention, they would not miss the opportunity.
Right, and again, we don't have a constitutional convention to look at, so we don't know which opportunists are going to get in. You can look at things like local charter revision. In Connecticut, every city and town every 10 years has to have essentially they have a charter revision commission that looks at their charter, which is your local level of a constitution.
Right.
And I know that at least in Stamford, and I believe it's this way everywhere else in Connecticut,
Right.
it doesn't matter who comes up with an idea and says we want this in the charter. The commission goes in with no mandate. Their only mandate is to review the charter and possibly amend the charter.
Yes.
So if a bunch of people in town say we want the Board of Education expanded from 3 members to 5 members, that's great. Get on the commission and bring that up, but that doesn't mean the commission has to address the number of people in the Board of Ed. They don't.
Right.
They're not. So you look at a convention of states, there are several states have petitioned Congress and said we want to address this, and we want a balanced budget amendment, and we want term limits, and I forget what the other big one they want is. There's basically 3 things. And again, the proponents of the Convention of States will say, well, all the petitions to Congress have to be the same. And I said, well, look at Gavin Newsom, who seems to think the governor of a state can propose amendments. And he seriously is attempting to get somebody in Congress to introduce an amendment to gut the Second Amendment. Now, we do know from Prohibition and the repeal of Prohibition that the only way to get rid of an amendment is to pass another amendment that gets rid of that First Amendment. But what would happen if another state sent to Congress a letter saying we want a convention of states, and we want term limits, and we want the balanced budget, and we want to repeal the Second Amendment? What does Congress do with that? First of all, we don't know if Congress even has to list those mandates on the thing. They can just simply call the convention and let the convention deal with it as they. I don't believe there would be a mandate saying these are the only issues to address. Because again, in a deliberative body, somebody can stand up and make a motion.
Yes, exactly.
So I don't believe that the convention will be limited to specific topics. But what do you do if everybody agrees on 3, but everybody has a different 4th? What does Congress do? Ignore all the 4ths or include all the 4ths?
Well, I mean, it's not an either. I mean, it would be either or. I mean,
Right, but we don't know
basically
because
voting
again,
on
there's
it.
no rule.
All right, now we have to call the Rules Committee. Right, now we got to make a rule and then figure out what we're going to do.
But Congress doesn't operate under any rules on this because all it simply says is they have the ability to call when a certain number of states ask for it. They have to call the convention.
Right.
That's all it says. They call a convention. No one knows really what they would do with it, what the mechanism would be. So I think it's very dangerous because we have a lot of people that, even some of them well-intentioned, but let's not forget that there was a young man who, oddly enough from Stamford, who went down, jumped the fence at the White House, was running towards the White House, and was stopped by Secret Service, who was trying to bring his new constitution to the president.
When did this happen?
A few years ago. I'm going to say it was during tail end of Obama, maybe.
Okay. So he was bringing his new constitution.
Yes, he'd rewritten the Constitution. To this day, it's never been made public.
Interesting.
No one knows what he wanted or what he didn't want in there, but he was trying to deliver his new Constitution to the president.
Seems odd. I mean, all you got to do is make copies.
Yeah.
And get
He wanted to hand deliver it to the president.
Hmm.
Secret Service had other ideas,
Yes.
and probably by the fact that he went down kind of late at night and was running across the
That didn't
South
help.
Lawn in the middle of
No.
in the dark.
He
But
thought he was being clever. Yes.
but again, there's a guy who had ideas.
Yep.
Now, most people think he's a little odd. Most people would think he's a little touched to the head, maybe even call him crazy. But he had ideas. He had he had constitutional proposals. We don't know what's in them. But as an American citizen, he's more or less able to get those constitutional amendments in front of somebody than you or I are.
Yeah. Well, it handled it a little wrong, perhaps.
Absolutely. I mean, didn't use the right process. Apparently, didn't read the existing Constitution on how this works.
Right.
But
Anyway,
again, he's a guy with an idea.
Right. Anyway, do you know Becky Hammond?
Yes.
Right. So she's going to be here in a couple of weeks, and we'll be getting into it with her.
She's one of the best we have on our Board of Education. And
That is for sure. That is for sure. That's a stay tuned and make sure you watch Becky when we do her note. So that said, I mean, have you read any of the things that she's written? And
off and on, there's nothing that I could really put my finger on. I mean,
yeah, we know there's a big fight over quote equity going on in Stanford, and she's in the middle of that.
the equity is just another one of those buzzwords we throw out there. There's, of course, the cartoon that you'll see about equality and equity, about who's on what, people standing looking
On
over a fence,
boxes,
and they're
right.
standing on different boxes.
Right.
And people seem to think that equal rights means equal outcome. It doesn't. It means equal opportunity.
Well, we've had these examples, right,
Right.
where federal officials have been quizzed on hearings, and they can't define equity.
No, because it's a buzzword. We don't need to know what the word means as long as we say it enough times.
Right.
Because as long as I look in the camera and reply in a monotone, goodness, good things, say good things, because that's ultimately, what the monster on Main Street in the Twilight Zone did. He made TV. It's good that he made dinosaurs.
Okay.
You don't like dinosaurs? We're off to the cornfield with you.
Let's see.
We live in the Twilight Zone, where you can be sent to the cornfield if you comment on the dinosaurs.
There's probably an element of truth to that in different facets. Something to think about. However, back to, what I'm trying to do is get into education in
Okay.
Stanford. There's this other, just to bring it up, you have the public education system, and then there's this place I drive by on High Ridge every time I'm there. There's Spire Academy, Pinnacle Academy, and
Yeah, I don't
Goddard
know too much
School.
about it, but it's 3, I believe, charter schools sharing what was an office building.
Right. So that's interesting. Then in addition, there's a pop-up homeschooling academy that's formed on a church on, I think it's on High Ridge. And
That's Grace, I believe, Grace School
perhaps-
there at Stanford
perhaps,
Baptist.
right.
And yeah, that's not even homeschooling. That was a parochial school that was started.
Okay. And then there's another one called Waterford? Or
Waterside.
Waterside.
Waterside School. There's a lot of these charter schools simply because they're run by charters, but almost every company has a charter.
Right. And then
We
there's
like to
Long-
reinvent the world. We like to reinvent the world every few years and say, we did something new. It's just like the old thing, but it's new.
This is the heart of the problem with education. They are stuck on faddishism,
Yep.
faddishness.
I'm going to say that schools probably broadly fall into 4 categories. You have your public schools, your traditional public school run by the government, and that's the biggest group. You have your private schools, which, they get their funding from tuition and whatever donors they can get, and they say, okay, we've got this great idea, we're going to run the you know, Bill and Fred's private school, and we got a big campus over there. You got your charter schools, which are partially tax funded, but they're privately run, and then you've got your homeschooling. Well, actually, I would even say that there may be parochial schools would be a subset of the private schools.
Right.
So your parochial schools are private schools, but they are with a religious element to them.
Sure. Right. The vast majority of homeschooling is Christian.
Right. Now, homeschooling is becoming interesting because as more and more people are getting into homeschooling, they're beginning to form co-ops and associations
And what I call pop-up academies.
right. The difference, it's getting very fuzzy between what is homeschooling, where you would sit in your house and teach your 5 kids, or when all of a sudden it's like, well, Mrs. Jones down the street, she's good at math, so she's going to teach 20 kids math. And then I'm going to come in and teach history, and then someone else is going to come in and teach spelling. And at what point are you running a school? At what point have you become a private school? I don't think we know the answer to that.
Yeah. Well, to add to the fuzziness is the surprising fact that in a number of cases, the public schools work with the homeschoolers. They allow them to socialize with kids, they allow them to be on the sports teams. They'll give curricular support materials and stuff to parents who are looking for it.
Well, of course, allowing the kids from the homeschool to be on the sports teams is less about doing something great for the kids and more about showing the almost unnatural amount of control the sports have on our education system.
Well, that's endemic, you know.
Because
I'll give you an example. So here's, Jim. You talked with him, Jim Kenny. And so now he's developed this character called Stuck Buckster. A Twitter
Yes.
character, you could call him, right?
chat back and forth with them all the time.
Yeah, so, okay.
It's Buck Stuxer.
Buck Stuckster.
Yep.
Right. And he has been putting up his versions of various memes and stuff, getting 100 hits here, 100 hits there. But then all of a sudden he starts to drag in the professional football teams. You know, he's from Baltimore, so he has a few things to say about the Ravens, a few comments on the game with the 49ers. And the same Buck Stuckster, who's making these comments, suddenly gets 4,000 hits,
Yep.
just like that. So
Well, and one of the things is that now the high school I went to, which we talked briefly about, was performing arts based, but we didn't have a principal. We had a head administrator. He made the same money as a principal.
okay,
He had been a vice principal, but he was a head administrator. Do you know why he wasn't a principal?
why?
Because FCAC rules say if you have a principal, you have to have your own teams.
Of all the damn things.
So the athletic program
What are you thinking with a rule like
defines
that?
whether you have a principal or an administrator. So by having a head administrator, if I had wanted to play on a sport, I would have gone to Stamford High School for the sports and stayed at Ripon for my academics. There were kids in class
Okay, look at that.
who were on West Hill's team and on Stamford's team.
Wild.
West Hill and Stamford didn't want to have to lose a third of their players to the Ripon team, so we had a head administrator. That also means I didn't get a diploma from Ripon. I got a certificate from Ripon and a diploma from Stamford High
Go figure.
because only principals can sign diplomas.
All right, so there you have it.
So you take a family that wants to homeschool their kid because for whatever reason they think they can do a better job in the public school. And I'm not going to make that value judgment right now. That's not the point. But the point is their kid's a really great basketball player. But he's homeschooled. So that's when the school, because the coach went to the principal and said, you know what, we need this guy in basketball.
Just the goofy arrangements that people come up with.
So you know what, we
It's
should
just-
let all the homeschoolers play on the teams because we need this tall kid who's getting homeschooled.
Yeah, all right. Well, I don't know if you have a comment on this, but the other thing I just wanted to throw in, and it will get talked about, is how the state has decided to dilute advanced placement courses.
Yeah.
They've lowered the standards.
Lowest common denominator.
And it's based upon this misbegotten concept of equity. So they're saying, if you're not qualified but you want to be in the advanced placement class, go ahead. Now the teacher is stuck with a dilemma. Teach like the way he did before, and there's going to be a portion of the class that will automatically get flunked out.
I look at it this way.
You have to dumb it down so you can keep them in the class.
What's the goal of education? What's the goal of the school system?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm still thinking like Thomas Jefferson. You want to produce educated citizens.
Okay, on a very basic level, the job of the school system is to educate people, right? I think we all agree on that.
Yes.
Or is the job of the school system to make everybody happy?
Happy. How do I feel about that?
Which is it?
Well, I think
At the end of the day, when you're done with school,
yeah. Well,
should you have knowledge or feel good about yourself? It would be great if we could do both.
oh, I see the way you're setting this up.
But-
okay, yeah.
Do I learn things, or do I just get to wear the cap and gown and walk down because I like parades?
It certainly would appear to be moving in that direction. You know, I just,
Education should be thought of as a commodity.
All right, yeah.
Schools are factories that create educated people.
right. You know, there's an article I'm thinking about writing that would be titled "The Fallacy of Affluent Supremacy," and you know, it starts, for example, with the fact that we're finding that the Ivy Leagues indulge in grade inflation.
Yeah.
Okay, it's affluent kids that are going to these schools, and they think they're somehow academically superior. But here you have grade inflation. It's just another form of dumbing down.
I was helping to teach a class for a trade program, and I had somebody that refused to participate in the class.
Yeah.
One aspect of the class, I'm not going to do that. You
Yeah.
have to do this because we have to see you do this to pay. No. Went to the lead instructor and said, what do I do with this student who will not participate in the class? And they paid their tuition. You got to pass them.
Oh, geez. Okay.
You know, here's the form. You can sign off on the person. I can't because I didn't see them do this thing. But they
Yeah.
paid their tuition.
All right, so this translates then into this other article I saw, where it seems like a small but growing number of employers are saying, "I'm not going to hire people from the Ivy Leagues because they're not as advertised.
Mm-hmm.
They don't come with a premium. They don't come with extra skills or capabilities. And if anything, it's the opposite."
Yeah. You know, the schools built themselves up, and then they got so built up, they began to lower their standards.
Oh, yeah, it becomes a curious thing. I mean, we know that this is because they're so ridden with guilt about people who are not up to the job, and gee, we got to do something for them.
Well, I think the other thing is it's funding based. Like I said, you got your private schools that depend on private money. How do I get private money? I got to convince people to give me private money. Now, look, I'll give you money if my kid gets a degree. I don't know if your kid's going to get a degree. Is he smart enough to get a degree? I don't care. I've got money.
Well,
And all of a sudden they go, well, you know, we need a library. This guy says we build a library. All I got to do is say his kid passed.
all right, well then, for some fireworks, let's go there. All right, now let's talk about the donors who refuse to give any more money to these schools because of the pro-Palestinian protests.
Well, that's one of the dangers of the thing. All of a sudden, your school takes a political standpoint after years of saying we're not going to take a stand, and all of a sudden, that donor who was going to give you that library comes to you and says, "Well, you know, I just realized that library I was going to build you. You're putting books I don't agree with in that library, so no, I'm not going to build your library for you."
Oh, well, it's worse than that.
Sure,
Yeah.
that's just an example, and a very oversimplification.
I mean, a milder form of this, for example, many years ago, there was some family that wanted to donate something like $25 million to Yale for a Western civilization program. The hemming and hawing and the backpedaling and the downplaying by Yale over this Western civilization program was enough for them to say, okay, we are withdrawing the offer.
Mm-hmm.
That is just, you know, yeah, it's political. Yeah, they're biased. It's worse than we think.
But they are
And the time
private.
is
They are
short.
private universities that are allowed to have a viewpoint. I mean, if somebody said they wanted to donate $25 million to a school, as long as you create a chair of Nazi studies, most people would say, "Wait a minute, the school has a right to say no. We're not going to teach about Nazism." Mm-hmm. Well, but I got money.
Yeah, well, we'll find a school that takes it. And speaking of taking it, we're getting the high sign.
Yep.
All right, guys, we could go on a lot longer. The studio audience says no. All right, so this
No matter
has
how
been-
long you talk, you're only scratching the surface of politics
Yeah,
and
well,
education.
yeah, I know. There's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about with respect to Stanford and education that we didn't get to. That'll have to be part 2. So
Thank you
this
for having me here.
commences part 1. Thank you very much.